into the equation?
No, it's someone else blowing.
Well, you just tell us if you...
Yeah, I think we're okay with that lower volume now.
Okay. So how old were you when you were starting to have those feelings?
That was like 16, 17 was when I first started coming out here and everything more often.
And you mentioned that you sort of got on this path to anarchy. Where did that come from?
Mostly just running around with a bunch of anarchists in Detroit more than anything, but it's kind of been a political adventure of going more into it, less into it, being more of a libertarian to back to anarchist. I've had a really weird kind of political arc. But all inherent distrust of the government, one way or another, has kind of been like fundamental. I've never been much of a patriot, for lack of a better term. So.
And how did you find your fellow anarchists?
Well, just looking to get into like local activism, because when I was up north, I was the type of kid that was always running around with groups like Greenpeace and local like environmental organizations, everything. I was really passionate about that. So I just looked for those people when I was in Detroit, and I found all of them, and then I kind of just got, neck deep into that whole scene. So.
And what was the objective of the people that you're now surrounding yourself with?
Now or then?
Well, then.
Yeah. Then the main.
I should ask that in past time. So, what was the objective of the people you were surrounding yourself with?
Then it was the Turn on the Water marches, which was the big international scandal of Detroit running around and shutting off everyone's water. And I was running around with those guys, mostly, turning people's waters back on, and then the city would come and put grates over them, so we would cut the grates off and turn their water back on, and lots of people getting thrown in the back of cars, and madness and chaos, and that's kind of like where all this really started. So.
And what was your interaction with law enforcement back then?
Always extreme, even regularly, especially being a white guy in Detroit. The cops would just immediately pull you over if you were in a black community because they assumed you'd be buying drugs. So multiple times just getting pulled over, thrown over the front of the car searched, let go. Never positive experiences with the police.
And the people that you were hanging out with, were they mostly white anarchists?
It was definitely mixed. Being in Detroit, it was a splash of everything, kind of every kind of person you could think of.
Were you all armed?
Then no. So that's kind of changed, obviously, recently, but then no.
So how are you sort of carrying out your activism back then?
Just traditional ways, street protesting, civil disobedience, that kind of thing, and that obviously carried on over.
So would you in what way were you kind of inciting anarchy?
Just not valuing or caring about what the laws are, really, and still that's kind of still to this day I don't really acknowledge that authority. The things I do it because I feel like they're moral, not because it's the law. And if there's something if there is a law that I view as immoral, then I just don't follow it. It's kind of real simple.
How is that affected, for example, your record?
My record's mostly stayed clean somehow. Mostly just because a lot of police participate in catch and release. They don't actually charge you with anything. They just hold you for a while, and I've been pretty smart otherwise. But definitely, things here and there.
When did firearms start to enter the equation for you?
That was when combining firearms and activism. That was recently, within the last year, with what happened with Duncan, Lemp, and what happened with Breonna Taylor. You kind of saw this zeitgeist spreading all over the country of everyone getting armed. It isn't just white conservative militias anymore. You have every single group, every single ideology, and they're not only buying guns, they're showing up with guns.
I'm going to back us up a little bit.
Me personally, my whole life's been destroyed by it. I owned a business, I was successful, I was happy, and then with COVID and the lockdowns, I just destroyed that, and it's caused nothing but financial troubles ever since. When it comes to the actual virus, no issues with it, no family members, no personal friends, nothing, so that's kind of been a non-entity in my life. But definitely, the lockdowns in particular kind of just I ran around to like local festivals and stuff like that. So, like lawn decor and like home decor and stuff like that. I'm a painter by trade, so there's like a lot of like knickknacks and art and stuff like that is what I mostly did. And obviously because of the lockdowns, there is no art fairs, there's no festivals, so kind of couldn't do that.
And in the circles that you were spending time with, look at that red bird over there.
Cardinal?
Sorry that got distracted.
Cardinal? State bird.
Beautiful. Oh, is that? Okay, sorry, got distracted. So did you, when Michigan started to lock down, how did you feel about that?
In the very, very, very beginning, like before the lockdowns, when we were seeing videos out of Wuhan and everything, and it looked like, by God, the world's coming to an end. They're welding people in their homes. Like it was kind of scary. But as like it progressed on, like more and more were less upset at the lockdowns in particular, but were more upset that the government wasn't doing anything to help really anybody. I know so many people, myself included, never gotten a stimulus check, never got the PPO loan for their business, never got bailed out. I still have people that are in my family that are applying for unemployment still today from a year ago that haven't received any money. And definitely in Michigan, the eviction moratorium, which was supposed to be in place, people are still getting evicted, and the government isn't really doing anything about that. So that, just like with other things, it turned from being about the virus to being about like, hey, you have hundreds of thousands of people that you essentially told them they have to put their life on pause, and then you didn't help them, and they're getting angry, and that's kind of like where everything started coming out of.
So your disenchantment with the government really started to grow even more.
Somehow. Yeah, somehow. I didn't think it was possible, but yeah.
After the lockdowns were imposed, there were quite a number of armed groups that started to exercise their voices and they started showing up around government facilities and protesting. What did you think about that?
I mean, that's where I found a lot of the people I run around with nowadays was from the anti-lockdown protests. And, that showing up in that way, like a lot of people just kind of didn't understand what was happening, especially in Michigan. But at least in Michigan, there was a lot of restrictions that were specifically targeted against the rural community, that the more like urban and wealthy community were like, this is no big deal, but it destroyed people's livelihoods. And then they got really surprised when like a bunch of rednecks showed up with guns. And it's like, well, you can agree or disagree with that, but I don't know how you can see that being a logical conclusion for those actions. And obviously, like those type of people I didn't get along with as much, but through those events I found more of my people there, more of the anarchist types, and that's kind of like where we started organizing and consolidating.
It's so interesting that the lockdowns kind of brought you together with people who might be more sort of right wing.
Well, I mean, those people not as much. Everyone I run around with more libertarians and anarchists. But in the beginning, we were more welcomed by the right until everything started happening with the BLM events, and that's kind of where that split happened. Them obviously being very against it, and us being, having our own take on it and participating in our own ways, and that kind of went from being more accepted by the right to not at all anymore.
You found yourself kind of aligning with a lot of anti-government groups, but on the other side of the political kind of equation.
Right. Yeah, like in the very beginning, it was mostly like conservative and stuff like that. For sure. What do you think about that? I mean, I've always never really cared who I was involved with. It was all about the fight, and if you agree with me on this, then I'll fight with you, and if you don't, then we just have to deal with that. But there was definitely tons of very heated arguments about the police at even like those original like lockdown protests of try like them still being militantly pro-police while protesting the government, and that's more like libertarian anarchist people being like, well, who's shutting down your business? And, it's not your senator. So even in the beginning, there was friction kind of there.
So would you show up to those protests with weapons?
Yes.
And was that the first time you started to bring them around
the first time he personally wasn't to a BLM event, but definitely everything. So like the first time they went down there was weapons. That was the first time they had like open carry activism. And for a lot of us, it's the first time for people participating in activism at all. Like I'm kind of a little bit of an anomaly. Like I've been a lifelong activist, but a lot of people, they've never kind of done this before. So this is all very new to them, and a lot of people are still learning.
And you're talking about the lockdown protests first, right?
Yeah, lockdowns.
This is pre-BLM.
Yeah,
Okay.
lockdown and both of them at the same time. Like, because the lockdown protests quickly, we were only locked down for like a month and a half or something like that until Breonna Taylor and everything started happening, and that kind of like changed things.
So tell me about what those early protests were like when just a whole bunch of people started showing up.
I mean, definitely revolutionary vibes for sure, and obviously I have no complaint with that. But it was definitely surreal of like kind of sitting there questioning like, is this it? Like, is something going to snap here? Because there's a lot of angry people, and as it went on, people only got angrier. So it's like this could get serious. Like I've definitely spent a lot of long nights watching the situation, being like, well, is today going to be the day that people just snap or something like that? And kind of both hoping that doesn't happen, but at the same time hoping that something productive does change. And it was a very interesting year for that.
And so when did the kind of split happen?
Definitely with Duncan and Breonna. That was where things rapidly broke down. Because of that, mostly because of the police, because the conservatives, there's things we do agree with them, 100%, but they desperately clung to kind of the tops, and we were like, well, this, Duncan was one of, like, he was a militia member, he was a 3%er, he was killed in his home by the police, and none of them showed up for his protest, none of them did anything, and it's like, well, we can't stand with you guys anymore, because you pretend that you don't like the government, but at the end of the day, you're going to side with their primary, enforcement arm in every single situation, no matter what. And just couldn't tolerate that. And those arguments kind of got more and more extreme to the point now where there isn't really like a relationship with that. There's definitely still more conservative elements that we can get along with, and we can still talk to, but they're also the people that are a little more critical of the police, to where the more Proud Boy types and stuff like that can't associate with us really. So
before we get to Duncan, what has been your perception of militias when they're locked up down here in your state of Michigan?
I've just always had a positive view about them, always kind of, the entire culture around it, not just like the right-wing militias either, like always the Panthers, always, recently like John Brown Gun Club and stuff like that. I've always been preferential to just communities kind of taking care of their own, knotting themselves up, and not relying on the government for that. Just that communities can police their own communities, that you don't need out-of-state, enforcers with badges to do all of this.
Did you ever notice a thread of white supremacy that ran through a lot of these militias?
Definitely up north, you would see groups for sure that I wouldn't know if you'd say overt white supremacy, but definitely like elements of racism, just for the fact that Confederate flag waving, like very strong in opinions that I would not want to repeat about people in the South and people in Detroit and stuff like that. And then obviously you would get the mega Christian, like, people that think the end times are coming or something like that. So those people are always around, but then, for every one of them, you had just like generic conservative guy that just wants to protect his family. But it was definitely like intermingled, and as time went on, even those kind of like split to where now like the more normal conservative militias have kind of stayed where they are, to where the more like radical, like racist and sometimes even white supremacist people have broken off and just formed like their own kind of way more extreme organizations. So you're seeing kind of like division even within those levels rapidly.
Do you think that militias have too often been painted as kind of extremist white supremacists?
Yes, 100%. Just because like the media doesn't talk about the Panthers. Like the Panthers are still around, they still go to events, they never went away. But if you just watch the news and read history books, you think there was just some weird thing that happened in the 60s and 70s, and then they never existed again. Where they're still showing up in numbers at events all the time. You have leftist militias, you have, communist militias, you have Asian militias, but the media doesn't really talk about that, just because they kind of want to focus the whole narrative on scary white guys with guns, and push that in for the gun control stuff and everything, and kind of ignore and erase all of the minority and the more different political groups that exist that are armed.
How would you define militia?
Just a group of individuals within their community that get together to train and organize to protect their community in the best cases.
And would you say that a common thread among militias is a disdain for the government?
Yes. To a degree, obviously, because, like I said, the more conservative militias, they'll hate the federal government, but they'll be more preferential to local government. Maybe they'll be more Republican and just hate Democrats or something like that. It's really selective. But in general, the threat is a fear of the federal government, and then the further down you go to someone like me, it's just all government.
What role do you think Donald Trump played in elevating militias to mainstream media?
I definitely think the whole 4 years of the Trump years are kind of such a surreal and strange and chaotic kind of thing that it simultaneously got these groups to kind of organize and participate in activism more, because they were always there. You just never saw them because they were in their rural communities. They'd go to the gun range every once in a while. They weren't hitting the streets, except for maybe a Second Amendment protest or something like that. But then you started seeing those groups actually go to events. And then, that's when, groups like mine and groups like, the Panthers and stuff like that was if these people are showing up with guns to these protests, so we're going to show up with guns to these protests. And that's kind of where we got to this point now, where you can be at an event and have 7 different ideological militias all open carrying rifles all in the same place.
With totally different ideologies.
Yes.
So how would you describe your ideology?
Definitely just, we have the heavy machinery going by.
I'm starting to a little bit.
We can ask you that question again
Yep.
whenever you're ready. Did you see camera open? The sun shower.
Doesn't bother me then.
As long as it stays like this, it's not bad. But if it starts to pour,
Yeah, we might have to rapidly move.
Yeah.
tell me when we're clear on audio.
Aaron, put a rider of Lisa over here. We should be okay for a little while, unless it gets starts to get wet.
Are you involved with Antifa?
Yeah. And some of my best friends identify as that. So I run around with usually, and I run a podcast with it. So actually, one of the ladies on their star, she's Rose City. Yeah. Real deal. Wood chipper, go bird.
Leave it? Yeah. Alright. About 10 seconds, we'll be good to go. Thank you. Are you getting wet, Lisa?
I'm fine.
We can put the flag over here.
No.
We're good on that.
The benefit of having Asian hair doesn't resolve. Good? Well, you tell me.
Yes, this is really good. Still feeding us? Still feeding. Alright.
Good?
Good.
How would you describe your ideology?
Definitely anarchist, more towards kind of the agorist, mutualist side of anarchy. All those million complicated anarchist terms, but yeah, definitely anarchist. Yes, I've like I said, I run a podcast with people out of Portland. I run around the local, Lansing, for lack of a better term, chapter. They wouldn't want it to be called that, but collective group and I've had interactions with people in Louisville, in Columbus, in Washington, D.C., so like definitely know some people that would identify as that, and they're close to me.
And have you ever considered yourself to be Antifa?
Not personally, just because my ideology is a little different than theirs, and kind of like my objective and how I go about things are a little different than theirs. I'm not, knee-jerk opposed to that, but obviously there is cowboys in particular groups and states where they do things that I would ever like associate with or support. But then again, there's other places where it's completely different, and that's kind of the whole thing I talk about all the time is like we're a country that spans an entire continent. Like what goes on in Portland might not be going on in Florida. The type of people in Maine might not be the same people as Texas, and kind of just like going based off of labels or how people like look or dress or whatever, it doesn't paint a picture. Even though like the media kind of tries to do that, where there's states where we can march with 3%ers and they agree with us and like anti-police and stuff like that, and then there's other ones where they're like standing on rooftop pointing guns at protesters, and they're also 3%ers. So it's more complicated,
What are the so let's get to Boogaloo Boys. So who are the Boogaloo Boys?
It's just a loose collective, very similar to Anonymous and how that came about and how that was organized and everything. That it's more of a libertarian anarchist kind of militia, more of anti-government, anti-police, different kind of thing. Loosely structured, spread out everywhere, and definitely kind of focused on not just allowing things to remain the way they are now. Sick of just kind of waiting for something to happen, sort of thing.
Are the Boogaloo Boys a militia?
I wouldn't consider us a militia, just for the fact that when you think of a militia, that's more tightly organized, there's rank structures, there's stuff like that, where this is more just kind of like a loose collective of people.
And what's the difference between Boogaloo Boys and Antifa?
Definitely just kind of like arms and the fact that like most people that identify as like Antifa, they wouldn't identify as Antifa, but you could put that too. They're anarcho-communists, anarcho-socialists, some of them, are just like democratic socialists, stuff like that. So that's more of the bottom left wing of the political quadrant, to where a lot of Boogaloo Boys we kind of span between, like, we do have a couple people that would identify as anarcho-communists, but there's also like anarcho-capitalists and libertarians and stuff like that. Heavily involved in like the Libertarian Party and stuff like that. So it's kind of the bottom two. Between us and Antifa, we represent kind of like the bottom two corners of the political spectrum.
What do you mean by bottom two?
We have like the four quadrants of like authoritarian right, authoritarian left, libertarian right, libertarian left. Nobody really started it. It's been a joke, kind of like a meme on the internet of like, breaking two electric boogaloo. That's kind of applied for everything. It's been around for years and years, and then the gun community picked it up, and it always kind of represented like a second conflict, revolution or anything like that, and it was always kind of based around if there's ever gun confiscation, that's when the boogaloo happens. And it existed as like a meme in gun culture for like years and years, and then with everything that's going on, that's kind of like formed into a real thing and kind of separated from that. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up, is like the meme is one thing, but like the movement is something completely different.
It's a movement, but different people or different members have different ideologies.
Yes. We all kind of have the same kind of similar objective and goal in a way, but we're spread out, just opposition to the government in all forms.
And how important is protecting Second Amendment rights in the movement?
That's priority number one, more than anything else. It's definitely like the two. I'd say like the two, maybe three biggest priorities of the movement is anti-war, anti-police, and pro-Second Amendment.
And so tell me about when the BLM movement and protests started. Like, where did you see your role?
Definitely just kind of, because, Breonna, more than anything in particular, kind of just saw like this breaking point in a lot of people, a lot of us included, of just like the militarization of the police has gotten so extreme and absurd that we don't even bat our eyes when armored vehicles pull up cops on a street. We just think that's normal, which is horrifying. And then obviously like what happened to Breonna and what happened to Duncan are almost like the kind of same thing in a way, and that kind of snapped something in me of just like, well, I'm sick of sitting on the sidelines, like I'm going to get out and get involved. And the only kind of movement or organization that's doing anything about that right now is, like BLM marches, like fascist organizations, stuff like that. And conservatives weren't fighting for anything because they don't really fight, they mostly conserve, so that's kind of how we all got mixed up in that.
So tell me about who Duncan Lemp was.
Duncan Lemp was a 21-year-old man out of Maryland. He was killed in a no-knock raid. His pregnant girlfriend was thrown on broken glass and brutalized all over a red flag warrant that turned out to be on false premises and false pretenses. And that was kind of like the moment for a lot of us, He was just a nerdy 3%er guy. He worked a lot in coding and tech. He was like a big fan of people like Edward Snowden and stuff like that. Kind of just typical internet kind of anti-government activist. But he also got involved in like his local 3%er militia and stuff like that. So heavily in the firearms.
Can you describe who 3%ers are?
3%ers are just the idea that it only takes 3% of the government, 3% of the population to start the American Revolution, and it's always kind of just been viewed as very broad, kind of like more conservative militia, but you do have a wide spectrum of 3%ers that are more closer to what I am, all the way to like 3%er groups that are like full of police officers and stuff like that, and then even ones that have like borderline kind of like big white supremacist ties. It's very, very broad.
Did you have much in common with Duncan Lemp?
Just definitely like in the way he, worked in the world, like being an internet kid, being involved in like Anonymous, and being very, anti-censorship, anti-NSA, anti-surveillance state, anti-police state. That was all things he was very focused on. So I definitely kind of like see myself in him as he was, he wasn't this what you have view of him, like this big, tough, like conservative dude who was kind of like a dorky kid like me that didn't hurt anybody and didn't do anything wrong, and definitely like watching what happened to him. And then within 24 hours after him, Breonna, and being like, wow, they're just, they're kicking the doors in and killing like normal people, like normal, harmless people.
And so would you say that those two events really inspired you? Would you say that they were two inspiring events for the movement?
Yeah, that was pretty much like the creation of it, is Duncan and Breonna. Like if you look up any picture of us in the beginning, you're going to see people walking around with Duncan, Lemp, and Breonna Taylor signs, both on the same sign. That's kind of the foundation. And a lot of us, also like felt ourselves in Kenneth Walker, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, because he was shot to defend his home from unannounced, unnamed intruders, and they tried to bury him for it. They tried to put him in jail. They tried to find him, arrest him, take everything away from him, and thankfully he skated away on all that. But the fact that it was like, unannounced, plainclothes officers could break into your home and you could shoot to defend yourself, and then they're going to try to put you in prison for the rest of your life. And it's like, well, do we even have a Second Amendment at that point? Because like, what else is the point? Does that only apply when the police aren't involved and the police can pretty much do whatever they want in any context and you're held liable for it? So definitely like with Breonna and Kenneth, and then with Duncan, that kind of just showed the kind of country we feel like we're living in.
He was so what compelled you to start showing up at some of the BLM protests?
Definitely, like, I wanted to get involved more, but I was in northern Michigan at the time because of COVID. I kind of just, like, disappeared for a while because we didn't know if the world was going to come to an end. And one of my friends that's involved in the local Lansing BLM, everything, like the Boogaloo meme had existed, and people had started like showing up to events and like BLM events and stuff like that in Hawaiian shirts, and like nobody was sure what was going on. And my friend contacted me and she was like, I know you talk about the Boogaloo stuff all the time. There's a kid here in Detroit with a Hawaiian shirt. And that was my friend Timothy Keegan, and that was the first night of the George Floyd protests in Detroit. And he ended up being actually like the first responder to a kid that was shot and killed in a drive-by at that protest. And there's video of him running around in his rifle and Hawaiian shirt. And that's when it kind of like became like, well, maybe maybe people like me have a purpose at these kind of events. Not all of them, but some of them, and because of how like violent and extreme things are getting. And then as time went on, it got a lot worse at these events, where you're seeing, whether it be the police versus protesters, whether it be counter-protesters versus counter-protesters, like violence constantly. And that's kind of when I was like, well, maybe I can do something about that.
And what was it like for you, this tall white guy with a beard showing up with weapons?
I'm actually probably like the most comfortable I ever am in my life at events. Really surreal, kind of zen almost in a way. I've never been like worried about it. We've had a gambit of experiences though, of like some places it's aggressive and people don't want us there. Other places like we're invited, we're welcome with open arms by the organizers, by what's going on. They're dedicated security. They know who we are. They tell everybody. So, and every step in between. It's been very interesting. I've often joked that we have probably one of the least simple like political positions in the entire country in terms of how we go about things.
So for some BLM protests, you and other Boogaloo boys are considered security.
Yes. Particularly like the year anniversary of Breonna Taylor, we were invited by the organizers to be there. We were their security. They knew who we got. We had no negative interactions. Everybody knew who we were. And Louisville's kind of like the birthing ground of kind of like this unity coalition thing we have going on, because Boogaloo boys have been on the ground like protecting BLM protesters for 140 days plus. They know everybody there. They know all the organizers. They're considered part of like that local movement. And then obviously in Michigan we have our own things going on, and then Ohio is another place, and Virginia as well, to where like very tightly linked in with like BLM activists and stuff like that there. With other places it's not as convenient, or there's not as kind of like that level of trust. So it's very mixed up, complicated, and sometimes it changes like month to month, day to day, depending on what goes on. So, but that's kind of just like always how activism is. There's definitely strong personalities in activism. There's lots of tribes and teams and different organizations, and sometimes even like local BLM groups won't work with each other and get aggressive with each other. So this just kind of comes with the territory.
So how often have you how often has violence erupted?
Never at any ones that we've ever been at, but then again, all the ones we've showed up, like overwhelming force and firearms, and kind of nobody. That's kind of the whole point of showing up with guns is people are infinitely less willing to start a fist fight when a bunch of people have guns, and the same with the police. The police's demeanor towards activists and protesters changes dramatically when guns are involved, where you'll see them with an unarmed protest be willing to escalate and use force on those protesters very quickly and easily for almost nothing, to where at more armed protests they don't want anything to do with it, and they just let it live and they let it be. Even if people are actively breaking the law like right in front of them, maybe not like looting or violence or anything like that, but like definitely in Virginia the best example was they banned open carrying, and we showed up with Black Panthers and stuff like that, and the cops just stood there. Even though every single person was breaking the law, it's just, well, they all have guns. So it's like, how much is enforcing this worth to have this situation? And that's kind of like the underlying philosophy. Usually rifles.
And right now this country has been enmeshed in a pretty fierce gun control debate. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on it?
They can pass whatever laws they want, won't comply. It's kind of I don't even participate in the debate. I don't really care what they say or what they do. There's more of us than there is the military. We're larger than any military in the world. They can try if they want to. I don't think they will try, so I just don't really care. And especially now with technology the way it is, you could kick every single firearms manufacturer out of the country. We have 3D printers. We'll make our own guns. We have plenty of people already do. I already do. So it's just kind of beyond the point. The debate is over. Cody Wilson from Deterrence Defense put it best of, you can mold your politics to reality, but I won't mold my politics to yours. And that's just the reality now is the gun control thing's kind of out of the bag, particularly now that like you're seeing extreme increases in gun ownership among the Black community, among the Latino community, There's entire like LGBT militias and organizations that have popped up. One of our events, someone showed up with a trans pride flag. We're carrying an AR-15 with like ballistic helmet or something like that. So I definitely just kind of think that they're totally delusional if they think that gun control is going to work to any degree in the country, regardless of the law. They can pass whatever they want. They can ban all these weapons. Nobody's going to turn them in. Nobody's going to comply. And what they would have to do to enforce that, I don't think they want, so we'll kind of see how that goes. But there's definitely an era of just kind of like, we don't care anymore what laws you pass or how you feel about it.
So you really don't care about proposed legislation that would impose waiting periods or background checks. That
Just
doesn't apply to you.
go around the law. Plenty of people already do all the time. And like I said, like 3D printing, you could put.
Bird. Hey! Damn it!
See, if we were more rural, you'd just fire the rifle once and all the birds would go away.
Okay. Lisa, can you pick that up again?
Yes, I love what you just said, trying to think of how I got you into it. So, there is a lot of discussion about using universal background checks and waiting periods and so on. What do you think about that?
Like I said, we'll just circumnavigate that. We already do in terms of like, private sales. Like a lot of people just do that anyways. And then with manufacturing now, like people can make guns at home and pretty easily to where you don't really need a lot of mechanical knowledge or stuff like that. And that technology is only rapidly increasing to where you're seeing it become almost on like a month-to-month basis, easier and easier for somebody like yourself, maybe not super familiar with firearms, to just read a guide online and buy a 3D printer and make your own firearms at home. So I think that it's just pointless, and it comes from people that do not understand the current gun culture, do not understand kind of the facts I just laid out, who are trying to force their version of reality onto the situation, and it's just not going to apply.
Given how many people are killed by guns every year in America.
Oh, sorry. Have we listened to the lobs?
I just put his lob up, yeah. I turned the boom down because it was a lot.
Yeah.
Did you shoot them? I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't shoot them because I love my bird, but I wouldn't be
kidding.
like I said, if it was further out into the woods, then I would just put a round in the air and they would all go away.
Oh, right.
Just the bang is all you need.
Did you see that red cardinal? It's so beautiful. Beautiful, right?
Oh, they don't care. You're in their land.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually think it's opportunity to go back with the
Go for it.
He'll get bored or find a target. Say something?
I was just texting with a militia member in Arizona who just got banned again from a social media account who tried to...
Well, I'm not even allowed to make a Facebook at this point. Like, if I hit create account and then...
We're going to talk about all that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
If you ever need a Facebook, I'll give you my login. I never use it.
No, because if I log into it on my phone, it's getting banned. Because I'm hard...
the IP address.
No, hardware. It's literally pulling from, like, for the lack of a better term, VIN number of my phone.
So if I tried to log into my Facebook on your phone, I couldn't?
You could, and then it would get banned.
Perfect.
Yep. My mom's got taken down for logging on my phone. Yeah, they don't want me to have any access to it whatsoever.
That was connected.
Hey, let's wait, and then we'll talk
Yeah,
about
sorry.
it.
I'm okay with repeating myself. So. I'm surprised though. Usually people have their cameras all on the gun. It's nice for once.
We'll get that when done. So.
Yeah.
We want that though.
Yep.
How much did that AR cost?
When I first bought it, it was $500, but I have so many.
That wasn't worth it.
Yep, it went from stock to probably better than the average U.S. Marines rifle at this point. So.
How much money?
So when you
did
say
spend?
rifle, you mean AR?
Yeah.
Particular AR.
Wow.
Any word on Darius?
Did you acquire the whole Hawaiian shirt collection over the last?
I only own a
last
couple,
year?
honestly, just because they're kind of expensive.
Yeah.
You know?
I like
So-
this one.
I like the pineapple.
Yeah. Tell me when we're good, guys.
We're good.
Well, we were talking about guns.
Yeah, of course.
So, how much would you say you are sort of guided by the Second Amendment?
I mean, definitely, I think that like arms and ammunition fundamentally, but even me personally, I'm not particularly bothered by the Second Amendment because I don't really view my rights coming from, a magical piece of paper written by guys that died 200 years ago. So I view it much more like natural and fundamental than that.
So, do you just think everyone at this point, because there's so many firearms in this country, everyone should just arm up?
Yeah, I mean, I unironically say arm the homeless. Like, that's how extreme I am about that. So yeah, I think that especially now, like, we're getting rapidly to the point where there's more people that own them than don't. So that's already how it is, I would love it to be some kind of utopia where we could snap our fingers and all the scary guns go away and everything be fine and peaceful. But especially now, like, if you think you're going to go to, a bunch of like Black Panthers and BLM activists and tell them to hand their guns over to the cops they've been protesting for the last year, don't think that's going to happen,
What role should government play in this country?
I mean, my personal belief, none. But obviously, I'm a little weird. But if I had to pick a more moderate position on it, just the absolute minimal, I think state and local governments should decide everything, and that the federal government should just stay out of it because they've done nothing positive. And as much money and power we give them, it seems that they'd rather use it to create mountains of corpses overseas on our dime than actually help people.
And what role do you believe law enforcement should play in communities?
Minimal to nothing more than maybe a moderating factor, or handling the paperwork, or maybe the courts or something like that, but definitely not in terms of the policing they do now. I don't see any purpose of why they're running around giving people tickets for expired tags or ripping people out of cars by gunpoint because they have tinted windows or something like that. It's extreme. Like, if any other time in the world, this would be viewed as some kind of surreal occupying force, like we're in some form of like military like lockdown, but this is just normal policing in America, where like you almost expect of like, my license plate are like expired by like 1 month, so I'm gonna get pulled over by this cop that looks like a military member, and there's a potential of that going radically sideways one way or another, and that's just normal now, and it's horrifying.
So, do you think that there should be any rule of law in this country?
I mean, I think there should be rules. I don't believe in laws, though. There's a difference to me. That's kind of like a fundamental anarchist kind of principle. But in terms of like actual laws, like any victimless crime, I don't understand why there's a law on it. I don't understand why there's laws on any drugs. I don't understand why there's laws on, possessions of certain objects. I don't understand registrations and tax evasion and stuff like that. Like, if there's a grieved party, if there's somebody injured or stolen from or something, then okay, that makes sense for there to be a law for that. But that's maybe like 10% of the laws on the books. Everything else, there's no victim, there's no crime. So why are we doing this?
So unless someone is hurt, you don't see any reason for any laws.
Yes. And that's just kind of like a very, libertarian sort of belief, to where even like the Libertarian Party kind of runs on that of like, there's no such thing as a victimless crime.
Most libertarians at least believe that there should be some kind of role for law enforcement.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a sliding scale. You have more Libertarian Party libertarians, and then you have crazy anarchists like me. So, you know.
What did you make of? So in that there are different kinds of Boogaloo members, right? I mean, there are a lot of right-wing Nazi proponents.
Definitely not really in the movement. I mean, you'll find people that kind of just try to like steal the garb or run with it, but they get sussed out really quick because, you know, we're primarily known now for going to BLM marches. So if you're a neo-Nazi trying to associate with us, those people usually aren't really good at hiding their beliefs. They're very obvious about it, so they don't hang out long, and it's definitely gotten to the point now where like you can go on 4chan and find like racist memes made of me. And like I have, you know, emails and stuff like that calling me like a race traitor and stuff like that. So like if that existed to any degree in the beginning, which there's probably definitely some people that just kind of identified with the imagery and the memes and stuff like that, that's definitely died now to where to like the more conservative types and then like the actual like white supremacist stuff like that view us no different than like Antifa or any other group. We're considered some kind of like, you know, infamously, as Alex Jones put it one time, that was like Hillary Clinton, CIA assets sent to destroy the Second Amendment in America and all this. So that's kind of been the fun part, to where the media is still kind of trying to run around calling us white supremacists, and then the white supremacists are running around saying that like we're like this infiltrating destructive force attempting to like end the white race or something. So it's been really fun, kind of been like, you know, I always joke that we're probably the most mislabeled and misrepresented like movement in the entire country.
Would you say that
Hold on one second.
He's back.
It's you. Great. Magnus, could you just repeat that last sentence?
Which part?
You're the most misrepresented.
Yeah, okay. Ready whenever you are. Oh, yeah, I think that we're probably like the most misrepresented and mislabeled like movement in the country, for sure.
So how would you characterize the movement?
There's a point.
It's another beautiful bird.
It's a robin. The dogs are barking at the point. They have two beagles over there, and they're very energetic. Good?
Good.
So how would you characterize the movement?
Just like a broad anti-government in all forms and fashions, more than anything else.
Does race play a role in it at all?
Not really. I mean, in terms of like objective and identification and stuff like that, not really. We definitely, a lot of us acknowledge that the scales aren't exactly balanced in this country, that these laws are not applied equally. So we definitely, like, you know, we're not, you know, reductionists. We don't just pretend like, oh, you know, we're not all lives matter type people. But in terms of like what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to do, there's not a racial element to it. Mostly just because we're so diverse. You know, we have membership of every form and fashion. You know, one of my best friends is trans. One of my favorite people around here. He's a super tall, giant black guy. You know, like, and we have every color and shade in between of every gender, race. You know, even ethnicity. Infamously, one of my friends is currently being deported because he was a illegal immigrant and he was a Boogaloo boy, and that definitely, you know, confuses people. Of like, oh, aren't you guys like conservative, like close the borders, hate immigrant people? And it's like, no, like one of us was like an illegal immigrant, so it's like, you know.
So, given your aversion to law enforcement, I understand that law enforcement has really been cracking down on you all.
Oh yes, I've been visited by DHS, FBI. I've been one of our friends here got visited by the Secret Service. Almost all of us kind of collect our federal agency cards, and one of my good friends, John, is very recently going to be getting out of jail for sitting for a month under federal custody for trumped up charges from the FBI that eventually got dropped. So we're constantly targeted and harassed by 3-letter agencies. They'll show up to our work, they'll show up to our houses, we've been threatened, and we've been arrested and grabbed. And almost everyone who has been grabbed by the FBI has walked free because they have nothing on us. We're not committing any crimes, we're not doing anything wrong. But they still target us extremely.
Are you being looked at as a domestic terrorist organization?
Oh, I've been directly labeled as domestic terrorist by the DHS. They have a memo where it leaked, I think it was like 6 months ago, where it had the swastika, the Antifa flag, and then the Boogaloo Igloo all on the same page. And that was kind of like one of the things that started the Unity Coalition, was like going to like anti-fascist members and being like, the government doesn't view us as two separate groups. They view us as exact same. And that's only gotten worse recently, where there's a lot of documents that are leaking out of the military that show like don't associate with these extremist organizations, and has like, yeah, like typical ones like maybe like Proud Boys or like neo-Nazis, but also has like Boogaloo, Black Panthers, anti-fascists, like. So they've gotten to the point where they kind of consider anyone who's anti-government to any degree, we're all the same. They'll put a Black Panther in the same bucket as like an actual like swastika flying neo-Nazi easily, and that's kind of how the government views us now.
What's your social media status?
Banned off of literally everything besides Twitter. Twitter's the only one that survived.
And what was it that incited the ban for you?
In July, it was either late June or early July, they banned the entire movement off of their leading up to the election, including like a lot of libertarians. I think like the statistic was like 1/3 of all like LP affiliated, like actual Libertarian Party affiliated people were banned off of Facebook, and they just wiped our entire thing out. There's a lot of news stories and stuff about that, of them just going through and hard banning anyone who had any association with us, and then we'd make new accounts, they'd ban us again, and eventually got to the point where we're either IP or hardware banned. So like I can't even make a new Facebook on my account. The moment I create account, it gets banned within like 3 seconds.
Was there something that you posted that got you banned?
Nope. All of it was perfectly tame. It was just having any association with the Boogaloo movement. There was people like, and you know, it went even further than that. Like my Instagram, which was for my business, I'd never posted anything political at all. I didn't even have my name on it. That got banned. My Etsy page got banned. My Uber Eats got banned.
Etsy page?
Yes. Everything.
No, we can go back. That'd be lovely. I just didn't want to interrupt the bike. Thank you.
Do you want him to go over the...
Yeah. Let me know. Yeah, copy.
It's like
Pump double?
You got like one straight.
Thank you for having that down.
Get a fly away.
it came back.
On your right side.
It's this side.
You know what, let me just do that.
Yeah.
Trying to have consistency.
I probably crossed and uncrossed my legs like 300 times, so it's fine.
It's amazing how people do this.
Oh, people thought my beard was fake for a while. That was fun.
Maybe pick it up like where if you start an account,
Okay.
you get banned in 3
Yeah.
seconds, and then
Yeah.
into
So yeah, if I try to create a new Facebook account at this point, like the moment I hit click account, it's banned immediately. So like my phone, my IP address is all banned, and that's most of us. And then, like I said, they took down stuff that was unpolitical, unaffiliated, that had never had anything political on it whatsoever. My Etsy page, my Instagram, my Uber Eats, you know, everything pretty much been taken down. My PayPal.
You're banned from Etsy?
Yes, my Etsy page was taken down.
Isn't Etsy like a kind of a crafty...
Yeah. There was definitely some kind of active collaboration between all of these social media sites to essentially just destroy any online association with any of us.
What do you think about that?
I think, you know, if you consider fascism the corporate merger of, you know, corporations and state, of, you know, government and private business, that's pretty fascist in my opinion. Especially seeming like a lot of people, all they did was like share like a Hawaiian meme or something like that one time, and they're just like a regular gun owner, and they deleted their entire Facebook, and people lost like everything, you know, years and years of photos and everything like that, connections, stuff like that. And that was kind of like I said earlier, with the lockdowns destroying my physical business, that destroyed any online like artistic presence I had, and pretty much been unemployed ever since because of that. So definitely, you know, when you asked how the government affects like my worldview, like between the lockdowns and that, like pretty much destroyed my life. So I had to start completely over for nothing, for memes, you know, because at that point when I was banned, I had only gone to one event, and that was an event I was invited to, and nothing happened. And there was like no training, there was nothing, you know, even all that's legal, nothing even spooked the government, and yet my whole life was ruined over it.
So how are you making a living?
Now I'm just doing gig work whenever I can. and trying to live off of it. Not even close to really enough, but that's just where we're at, really. There's not a lot of places hiring around here. If they are hiring, they're not paying much better than that, so it's just where it is.
Do you think that you should be able to have free reign on social media?
I mean, obviously, like, there's a degree of private company when it comes to that, but these social media corporations are not really private companies anymore. They work very closely with the government. They receive money from the government. They work with senators. They, if you want to talk about like Google and stuff like that, they get private contracts from the government. They're working with DARPA on artificial intelligence and stuff like that. So it's like, at what point do you stop being McDonald's and start becoming Lockheed Martin? And I definitely feel like I don't feel obligated to anything, but I do think it's quite ridiculous.
And so do you think that is sort of fomenting a lot of anger amongst anti-government groups?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially recently, because everyone made a big story about like Trump supporters being banned and conservatives being banned and everything over the last 4 years. But since Joe Biden's gotten in, a lot of anti-fascist accounts and BLM accounts and stuff like that are getting banned. A lot of prominent left-wing activists are getting banned. And people are kind of starting to wake up to, like, it's not that they, like Facebook and all these companies had something against white supremacy or whatever. They broadly just wanted to get rid of anything radical or anti-government. And they maybe more tolerated the left-wing side of that over the course of Trump. But the moment Trump was gone, like, a lot of these counts are getting wiped out. And there's a lot of, fuss about it. And people are kind of just over it because it's just viewed as intentionally suppressing any kind of political thought besides generic Democrat and Republican beliefs.
Do you think that as a result of these bans, people are becoming more extreme?
Definitely, you can't police as easy. I've noticed that, because when we were all on Facebook, we had pages that had like 30,000, 50,000, 60,000 people on it. And if there was a racist or somebody that was, accelerationist, that was like, infamously, we had one guy that just kind of snapped one night. I don't know if his girlfriend broke up with him or whatever event, but he got on Facebook Live and he was like, I'm going to go shoot cops. And all of us, like, probably like 10,000 people, something like that, were in that chat being like, go home, dude. Like, this is wrong. Don't do that. Don't go just kill somebody. Like, we're here for you. What do you need? Blah, blah, blah. And we talked that guy down. And he ended up turning himself into the police and he was fine. Can't do that anymore. I don't have that option to self-police anymore. We're every bird in the neighborhood. Hey, John. Pretty boy. Okay, where am I picking up on that? Self-policing. Yeah, I mean, I don't have that option anymore. We're blown up across thousands of Signal chats, Twitter chats, Telegram, Keybase, all these places where I don't really know what's going on anymore in that. We can't really self-police those people out. We can't keep those people out. And I'm amazed that it's been as good as it has been, to where we really haven't had any events like that. But definitely, ironically enough, by trying to remove us from all of this, you've made it to where if somebody was unhinged or needed help or something like that, we can't give it to them anymore. We can't make sure. We can't catch that before it happens. And I don't think they understand that. That pushback from like more normal, more calm and sane people keeps people grounded in a lot of ways. And without that, one guy might go from a community of like 30 like loving people to like a small Signal chat of like 10 guys that want to nag him to go do something that we wouldn't agree with. And what can you do about that?
Are you an extremist?
I mean, I think myself, no. I think the idea of having any love for a government, that's million in Somalia, million Iraqis, like bombing in Yemen, bombing in all over Africa, like viewing that as valid, as legitimate to be extreme to me. So, but they would consider me an extremist.
Where is this all going to end?
I definitely don't think that America is going to be what we see it as now for much longer. A lot of people kind of lied to themselves and they're like, oh, Biden's in and everything's going to get better and change. And there was a riot last night. Nothing really changed. Qualified immunity didn't go away. There was a Republican and Democrat co-sponsored bill put to end no-knock raids that's dead on the floor. You're seeing another bailout to mega corporations. We're talking about bombing in Syria again, about getting involved with Iran and Venezuela again. The war machine kind of hasn't stopped. So everybody that thinks that like, oh, well, Trump's gone, the world's better now. It's like, no, this is the same old thing that got us to where we were in Trump with these riots and everything like that. And I definitely think like with the Derek Chauvin trial and everything like that, you're going to see a lot of normal people that are kind of tuned out of what's actually happened get really shocked when they thought that all the anti-Trump riots continue after Trump is gone.
How far are you on?
Me personally, I mean, depends on kind of what you mean. Like, I definitely consider myself a revolutionary, but I'm also very explicitly anti-accelerationist. I don't believe in going on the offensive. You'll never catch me talking about bombing anything or shooting anybody, but I've definitely divorced from the government. I do what I want. I don't care what laws they pass, and I have no hesitation to defend myself if someone tries to come into my bubble, because I'm peaceful. I don't hurt anybody. I don't cause any ill will to anybody, and if somebody wants to come in and do that to me, that's what they get.
You pay taxes?
Nope. I don't really have income to pay taxes at this point, but yeah.
When you do have income, will you pay taxes?
Probably not at this point. Just because that's blood money. That's that's not going to fill my roads or help my neighbor. It's going to kill some kid overseas for lies.
Do you foresee within your lifetime there being a civil war in this country?
I think we're already in one. That's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. I mean, if you look at the last year, well, the last 4 years, constant doubting of elections, street violence, different political factions fighting each other, gunfights in the streets, murders, assassinations, a car bomb blew up in Nashville. We kind of forgot about that happening, but because of the news cycle. But someone blew up a car bomb in downtown Nashville. And if you look at like Ireland in the period they call like the Troubles and everything with the IRA and stuff like that, that's going on here. We already have riots and gunfights between different political things and between the cops and everything like that. It's like the Civil War already happened, which is the surreal thing to me when people always run around and accuse us of like, oh, you're trying to start a second Civil War. It's like we didn't come into existence until people were already shooting each other over politics in the street. Like we're already there. The question is, can we turn that to be something positive that will benefit everybody and hopefully not be awful and violent, or are we going to go full Syria, where we have 32 different factions fighting each other and being friends one day and violence and bloodshed and collapse in the streets? And
I don't hear from a lot of people wanting peace.
yeah, there's not a lot of people who don't want peace. There's more talk of violence and extremism than anything. And ironically enough, people come at us and they accuse us of being like the worst version of it, to where like I go on social, Twitter and everything like that, and there's people just calling to kill each other like every day over benign political differences, let alone the more extreme ones. And it's just crazy. I don't know what kind of normalcy bias you have to not understand what's going on in the country right now and how much of a tinderbox it is, and how just single events. George Floyd was a single guy, one dude, and that was a year of riots. So like, what happens if something more extreme happens? What happens if there's some form of gun confiscation gone wrong and you have another Breonna Taylor situation or something like that? The country's real thin ice right now, and a lot of people kind of don't realize that.
So what do you think? What do you think is going to take to de-escalate the situation? Because cops aren't going away, neither is the government.
Definitely just a radical, from the bottom up reform of the government. I don't think anybody that's currently in power deserves to be in there. I mean, it's insane that we've almost proven at this point that the Iraq war was a complete lie, and we got into it based on complete lies, and yet people who participate in that lie are still in government, no charges, nothing. So I definitely don't view there's some simple electoral solution. I don't think a third party could take over, or we could just vote better Democrats in or better Republicans and the problem will be solved. I think it's infinitely more fundamental than that. And you definitely see a lot of talks of secession, of peaceful divorce, as a lot of people call it, and maybe that would work. That'd probably be like the closest solution I would see to working, of just not forcing people to live under the same roof anymore. But I definitely don't think the usual normal solutions are going to solve it.
Are you an advocate for
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I would prefer not to do it violently, because the whole thing about agorism is divorcing yourself from the system instead of fighting the system. To essentially just form your own government and just ignore the government that exists until that government goes away. That's kind of my way of going about it. I don't believe in some, grand idea like probably like the Capitol Hill rioters thought. We're going to storm Washington, D.C. and take over the government and freedom will be... No, that's not how the world works. Stupid and pointless. Didn't accomplish anything and just empowered the FBI and the government to run around knocking on everybody's doors and arresting everybody and essentially starting a second war on terror in our own home. So it's like, good job, guys. Like, we didn't accomplish anything. It was stupid and disorganized and destructive and, what good did it do anybody? Didn't help Trump, didn't help them, didn't hurt anybody besides all of us. So it's like, good job, There is such thing as bad tactics, and that was probably the worst example I could think of. Oh, 100%. We almost all agree that it's pretty much a death sentence to be involved with this whatsoever, that you're going to get your door kicked in eventually, no matter what. I mean, the amount of times that, that door right there has been knocked by federal agents at this point, it's like eventually, they're going to find some excuse. They've done it with plenty of my friends. They've grabbed them and put them in jail for weeks, months, and then let them go because they had nothing on them, but they want us gone, 100%. They view us as horrifying. And they didn't view us as scary or really care about us when we were just like running around lockdown protests and stuff like that. But the moment they saw us with BLM activists and like walking around Antifa and everything like that, that's when they're like, this has to go. And I think you see that a lot in our history of like, they, weren't a big fan of Malcolm X, but they didn't kill him until he started reaching out to white people. They, assassinated Fred Hampton when he started doing the Rainbow Coalition. I think the powers that be, when they view people kind of breaking down like these racial and these ethnic barriers and stuff like that and kind of uniting against the establishment, that's when they don't like it. That's when they shut it down. And ever since we started doing that, we almost all kind of feel that like it's inevitable at one point or another.
Does that scare you?
Not really. I mean, I kind of just would rather live free and try to accomplish something than live forever scared and desperately hoping not to get the door knocked. So.
I have one more question. What do you think the founding fathers of this country would think about the state of
I mean, that's a complicated one because I mean, George Washington put down a constitutional rebellion within his term. So I think a lot of people kind of misrepresent exactly what the founding fathers are about. But when it comes to their ideas, if they were like 100% the men they are taught out to be and preached to be, they'd be horrified by everything in this country right now. We have no liberty. We barely have a First Amendment. They're trying to get rid of the Second Amendment. We don't really have third, fourth, 10th, go down the list of how many things you don't have. It's accepted that this conversation right now is being listened to through all of our smartphones, probably in like real time by some form of computer that's putting that to a federal database. So it's horrified and appalled would be how I would put it.